Thank you so much for finding Channel Core. Let's do Nosferatu. Right after watching this, I skimmed through the original movie just to revisit what it was like, and yes, this is very much a remake of that, granted with 100 years of technological advancements in filmmaking behind it now. And in case some of you didn't know, this is based on Bram Stoker's Dracula, but with different character names, which yes, means this is basically Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, but with some differences. The look and tone of this are so engaging that it's on my medium shortlist of movies you experience, not just watch. And to me, that's one of the biggest compliments you can give any work of art. Johnny Depp's daughter, Lily Rose Depp, is the female lead as Ellen Hutter, who's being mentally tormented by the Dracula character Count Orlock from afar in Transylvania, and Nicholas Hoult is her husband, who goes on the trip to secure a real estate deal personally with Orlock. Again, with every version of both of these stories, the vampire finds a way to cross over water to get to the female lead for the second half of the movie or so. I keep forgetting Aaron Taylor-Johnson is British, and this is one of the few movies so far that we actually hear his real accent in.
Speak none of this to Ellen or my Anna, but we have another on the way.
He's the vampire skeptic friend of the Hutters who is dealing with young kids and his own wife, and then Willem Dafoe is the equivalent of Van Helsing in this. Bill Skarsgard completely transforms himself into the vampire, and in an interview recently he said that the insane voice he speaks in is all him, and that he went to a vocal coach for several weeks to get his voice to drop in actual octaves, which is awesome.
I will leave you 3 nights. Tonight was the first. Tonight you denied yourself, and thereby you suffer me to vanish up the lives of those you love.
As you can imagine, just like is the case with practically any Dracula project, the scenes with that character are more or less riveting the entire time, and this version is one of the most menacing and intense you're really going to ever see on screen. The main reason I wanted to look up the original movie was to see if the ending is the same, and yes, it really is. With kind of a warning that it's not a big blowout with heroes and villains chasing and fighting each other, not into the final scene or so at least. This is smarter than that. Where the movie compensates for that though is in how from the very first shot to the final scene, this thing just keeps steadily building up the tension and rising in suspense. Yet, oddly enough, despite how essentially every second of screen time with Orlock in it is relentlessly gripping, I never totally felt the heebie-jeebies of being genuinely creeped out. Like when horror is great, you get that split second of chest compression that's like when you're about to take the first drop on a roller coaster, combined with some chills. What's awesome though is there is one great standout creep out heebie moment in regards to one scene where Depp does a whole possession thing that I have to compare to Jennifer Carpenter in The Exorcism of Emily Rose. And I was just like, ooh, okay, I feel that. Very nice. In fact, I found the acting in general throughout this to be noticeably great. From a woman playing just a villager to Simon McBurney as Herr Knock, this movie's version of Renfield, and there's a great moment where I swear he shifts emotions 3 or 4 times in a row. Yeah, it's like right out of Gollum and Lord of the Rings, and Jodie Foster in Contact, which they did use CGI to enhance. However, that was only because Zemeckis wanted the emotions to have an otherworldly look that only CGI could produce. And heads up on Knock. Yes, that's Holt's boss, who acts perfectly normal in the very early scene where he's giving Holt the assignment to go visit Orlock, but then the next time we see Knock, he's in such hardcore Renfield mode that I did not realize it was even him. This is because of the combo of me not being familiar with him as an actor, there being a room full of old, balding British guys with white hair and mutton chops in an earlier scene, the lighting being all orange because it's all coming from candles, and honestly because he's shown so decrepitly and from behind that I at least briefly thought it was a cut to us seeing Orlock for the first time. I'm just saying beware, this is that guy in case you weren't aware at first or possibly never realized it at all, not until much later in the movie, and it's key to the plot as far as knowing that yes, Holt's boss is actually Orlock's disgusting, insane, devoted servant whom we're seeing on and off all crazed out like that throughout the rest of the movie. As far as pacing goes, I was actually surprised to find that I liked this even more the second time around. I mean, it wouldn't shock me to hear that someone felt this was slow burn, especially if you're expecting tons of action and Hollywood-style horror madness, but I gotta say, There's not really much fat on this, and as I mentioned earlier, it quite nicely keeps building tense momentum, with the first act effectively setting up and foreshadowing the rest of the movie, and then each scene moves quite well into the next, whether they're cutting back and forth between Depp and Holt or not. As I'm writing this review up, I'm finding myself making even more comparisons to Coppola's Dracula. Oldman and Skarsgard in both movies steal the hell out of every scene they're in. I always felt the Winona Ryder scenes back in England kind of dragged down the pacing a bit in Dracula, throughout the first half or more at least, whereas all the scenes back in Germany with Ellen are way more interesting in this. Same with Taylor Johnson's family. Keanu's acting is way better in Dracula than Nicholas Hoult is here. I'm kidding, of course. If anything, one of the biggest complaints about Dracula is the miscasting of Keanu. And Hopkins and Dafoe are essentially the same character, and while there is a comical line or two with Dafoe, it's a little more fun with Hopkins being quite a bit more comic relief with his brutally dry humor and intermittent kookiness in Dracula.
I want you to bring me before nightfall a set of post-mortem knives.
An autopsy, Lucy?
No, not exactly. I just want to cut off a head and take out a heart.
I'm not saying that's a criticism of this, it's just a thought that comes to mind with the comparison. With this being a horror movie by nature, of course it's going to skew more sad than not in some way, and likely in whatever crazy violent ways. I don't think it's fair to really criticize this for the direction I'm going here, but I gotta say that with the sadness elements to whatever capacity people survive or not, this tries to build towards very tearful moments. The problem though is in order to make that more powerful, you have to kind of redesign this movie a bit. The bigger problem is probably in how much longer do you need to make it in order to set up the characters the emotionality needs to happen with. And will that screw up the pacing and tone of this? Because the tone is consistent throughout, it's great, but you would probably need another 20 minutes at least to nearly an hour to get us to where we are knowing the handful of critical characters well enough to be truly choked up and in actual tears. So at that point it becomes, do you hit 3 hours with this and try to make it the Titanic of Dracula movies? I mean, if people were in tears, like straight up tears and choked up at the end of this like most people are in Titanic, this thing would win Best Picture. One really nice surprise throughout the second viewing is that I found this quite a bit more rewatchable than I really hoped. Which is again, I'd say, in just how solid the pacing is and how well each scene plays into the next. There's a little bit of female nudity, not tons of violence, but more than a handful of vampire nastiness, and anyone who's remotely interested really needs to give this a shot.